It goes without saying that a two-wheel drive is nowhere near as capable as a four-wheel drive, but you may be surprised to learn that in really rutted terrain like this hill here, a four-wheel drive with front and rear diff locks is that much more capable again. And if you don't believe me, here's an example. So now typically second and third gear low range are your hill climbing gears because they give you a nice blend of momentum and control. I'm doing this in first gear low range just so I can show you where the car would stop with no momentum. So right now I'll sit here, my wheels are turning, and the other one that's got the traction isn't doing anything. And I won't be going anywhere. If I engage the front and rear pro lockers and do the same hill, attacking it at the same speed, I should be able to crawl right through it and make it look like a piece of cake. The great thing about diff locks is, even with a wheel popping miles up in the air like that, you don't freak out because you're not doing 1,000,000 miles an hour. And the other good thing about them is they give you considerably more control. So you don't need to attack things with reckless amounts of momentum. And the other great thing about them is it makes you look like an awesome driver.
And to check more TJM four-wheel driving tips, go to tjm.com.au.
What goes up must come down, and the best way to go down hills is to make sure you attack them head on. Try to avoid side slopes wherever possible. Don't ever try and go down a steep hill on an angle, because that's just a recipe to flip your vehicle. Now the next thing, if you've got a vehicle like this one where it's got a big diesel and it's a manual transmission, they've got phenomenal engine braking. So first gear low range is the gear to use. Just let the engine do all the braking for you. The reason why you want to do that is it'll keep the wheels turning. If you use your brakes too much and you lock up, you lose the ability to steer. Now I've got my right foot on the brake just lightly feathering it, but I've still got the clutch all the way out, just while I line up the vehicle before I get into this rutted section. And what I'm doing now, so I am using the engine braking, but I'm feathering the brakes just for this first little bit. Once I'm through that, then I can let go of the brakes and let the car do its thing. Now if your vehicle does go into a slide and you lose the ability to steer because you've got your wheels locked up, you have to accelerate. It's a little bit daunting, but it's the only way you'll regain the ability to steer.
And to check more TJM four-wheel driving tips, go to tjm.com.au.
Driving back down an old dirt track, yeah, I've driven down a few. Somewhere between where I've been and where these wheels are going to. Well, you can take a road that's easy.
At some point in your travels, you might be in a situation where you're going up a steep hill and for whatever reason you can't make it to the top, or you've stalled it like so. Okay, now in this sort of situation, it's really important that you leave your foot on the brake. That way the car doesn't rock back. Now the next step is to pull up your handbrake. So I've still got it in first gear because that was the gear I was in when I stalled it. Now what I'm going to do, without hitting the key, is I'm going to quickly select reverse gear. And I'm going to leave my foot on the brake and I'm going to leave the handbrake up. So do that as nice and quickly as you can. The car shouldn't rock back because I've never let go of the brake. Now, the next step is to release the handbrake. Look in the rear vision mirror, know exactly which way you're going to go. Get ready to take your foot off the brake, turn the key, and because you're on a hill, the car will fire up itself and you'll make it down the hill nice and safely.
And to check more TJM four-wheel driving tips, go to tjm.com.au.
Driving back down an old dirt track, yeah, I've driven down a few. Somewhere between where I've been and where
speaking, the best gears to climb steep slippery slopes like this are second or third gear low range. The reason being is they offer a nice blend between momentum and control. First gear low range is often too short and you won't have enough inertia or momentum to get up the steep hill. Something else you've got to consider is throttle control, particularly in a manual vehicle. If you're taking off, try and pretend you've either got an egg wedged between your foot and the accelerator so you don't push it too hard. The theory is that driving up steep hills is a little bit like walking on ice, especially when you're taking off. You don't want to take off too quickly or else you'll just slip. It's the same with your vehicle. Wheel placement is something to consider going up hills as well as down hills. Now, depending on the track, you're often better sticking to the wheel ruts rather than trying to avoid them, especially if you're going down the hill. Reason being is ruts generally go straight down because that's where the rain's flowed. And they can act a little bit like train tracks, so your vehicle won't jump out of the ruts. Mind you, some ruts are exceptionally deep, so then you do have to avoid them.
And to check more TJM four-wheel driving tips, go to tjm.com.au.
Driving back down an old dirt track, yeah, I've driven down a few. Somewhere between where I've been and where these wheels are going to. Well, you can take the road that's easy, a highway.
Well, we're about to hit the soft sand on our way down to the Fraser Ferry, and aside from putting your four-wheel drive in four-wheel drive, the next best thing you can do before you hit the soft sand is let your tyre pressures down. The Troopy's got freewheeling hubs, so I need to lock these to make sure that I can actually engage four-wheel drive. Now, when it comes to letting your tyre pressures down, there's a number of different things you can use. There's nothing wrong with using your cheap tyre pressure gauge you'd get from a servo, but if you want to be a lot quicker, with these tyre deflators, the great advantages they have is that you can put all four on and let all four tyres down at once, so it's a lot quicker. But when you're using them, make sure you adjust each one identical, or else you'll have one tyre at 8 psi and the other one might be at 30 psi, which obviously isn't going to be too good. There's a bit of a misconception with four-wheel drivers that you need to break a land speed record to get through soft sand. Indian Head is probably the best known spot on Fraser Island to watch people go about soft sand driving the wrong way. Hundreds of people go through here and the sand all gets churned up, and admittedly the sand is quite soft. Let me show you how to go about it. The best way to take off in soft sand is nice and slow. Just let those wheels turn over until they climb up on top of the sand. Once you're moving, if you feel your vehicle starting to slow down again, often backing off on the throttle will actually help because your wheels will be able to climb back on top of the sand again. Something else that'll help is sticking to the wheel ruts. And to check more TJM four-wheel driving tips, go to tjm.com.au.
Driving back down an old dirt track, yeah, I've driven down a few. Somewhere between where I've been and where these wheels are going to. Well, you can take the road that's easy.
There are a heap of creek crossings on Fraser Island and most of them are pretty straightforward. You usually find that the best place to cross them is close to the salt water where it's at its smoothest. But if you do find one that's caught you by surprise and there's a big drop off, what you can do is hit the brakes, lose as much momentum as possible, but before you take the plunge, let go of the brakes. That allows the suspension on the front of the full drive to reset itself, so you've got more suspension travel, so it'll absorb the blow a little bit better. A Wynyard Creek can fluctuate a fair bit in depth. So, like any water crossing, if you're not sure of the depth, it's best to walk it first. It's winter time at the moment, so I think I might get Don to do this water crossing. Do you mind checking the depth for me?
Mate, I'd like to, but I've done my boots up too tight. I can't undo the knots.
I mean, you can't see your boots. Alright, okay, it looks like it's me. A Wynyard's got a couple of semi-decent holes in it at the moment. And this one is just about halfway up my leg, which doesn't look that deep, but on Don, that's about here.
That may be, but from where I stand, the only log in the river is you. Toby's walked that, so we know it's relatively safe. But one of the rules with water crossings is, particularly if it's flowing, If you can't walk it, you can't drive it. So just remember that.
The Awinya Creek crossing is pretty straightforward. The water's very clear and you haven't really got to worry about any real depth issues. Plus the sand's nice and firm. Something you need to consider in terrain like this is often the water will be quite weedy and that can build up in front of your radiator. So an hour down the track your car will be overheating. That'll probably be the cause. Now something else you need to consider with a water crossing like this where you've got two sizable holes is not to attack that deep section too quickly, because what can happen is water can rush into your radiator section and a lot of new vehicles will have their radiator fans very close to the radiator core. Another thing to consider is a snorkel. Now the Land Cruiser's got one fitted obviously, but a lot of vehicles don't have them fitted standard, and usually they'll be sucking the air from inside the guard or at the front of the engine bay, which is not ideal for water crossings. So that's something to be really aware of. Know where your air intake is, and if your air intake is down nice and low, you probably want to fit a bra just so you can push that water away from that vital area.
And to check more TJM four-wheel driving tips, go to tjm.com.au.